Hi everyone, this is our Chapter 18 lecture on the digestive system. So our digestive system will break down food using hydrolysis reactions. And below we have three examples of some hydrolysis reactions. On the top we have the hydrolysis reaction breaking down a disaccharide to two monosaccharides. So in this case it's maltose to two glucose molecules. And we can see the H and OH from the water that had been added. Here is a protein that which is a polymer of amino acids. It can be broken down to monomeric amino acids. And here we see a lipid, which is a triacylglyceride, and this can be broken down by lipase, which will help to add water to break these bonds. So we'll get 3 fatty acids and 1 glycerol molecule. And in each case, you could see the H2O, the H in one molecule, the OH in the other one, that was added to perform this hydrolysis, each of these hydrolysis reactions. And I should also mention that the digestive tract is open at both ends, and it's actually between the two ends is actually continuous with the environment. So we consider it the outside of the body, and materials that cannot be digested, such as cellulose, never enter the body. They enter the mouth and then come out in feces. And the one-way transport through the digestive system allows specialization for different functions in different segments of the digestive tract. So I have a few things to review with you about the functions of the digestive system. So the first function is motility. This is to move food through the digestive tract. And here's a few definitions to introduce to you. So the first is ingestion, which is taking food into the mouth. The next, mastication, which is the chewing and mixing of food with saliva. Degglutination is swallowing. Peristalsis is a wave-like one-way movement through a tract. And then segmentation is the churning and mixing while moving forward. The next function is secretion, and we have exocrine functions, which are which includes digestive enzymes, hydrochloric acid, mucus, water, and bicarbonate. And we have endocrine functions, which include hormones to regulate digestion. Then, for digestion, that is just the breaking down of food into smaller units, both physically and chemically. And we have absorption, which is passing broken down food from the digestive tract into the blood. And then we have, for storage and elimination, we have the temporary storage and subsequent elimination of undigested food molecules. Last but not least, we have the immune barrier, and the simple columnar epithelium with tight junctions prevent swallowed pathogens from entering the body in between cells. Any pathogen would actually have to invade a cell and cross that way, which is transcellular movement. And there are immune cells in the connective tissue of the GI tract that can help make an immune response. And the pH 1 of the stomach can kill many microorganisms. So when we eat food, it'll enter the mouth, travel down the esophagus to the stomach, and then from the stomach, the contents will pass down to the small intestine, and then to the large intestine, and then eventually to the anus. And there are some accessory organs, and this includes teeth, tongue, salivary glands, the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. And this is a close-up looking at the layers of the digestive tract. So on the outside we have the serosa, which is the connective tissue, and then we have muscular layers underneath. And then as we get below the muscular layer, we can see we have these invaginations or these villi that dramatically increase the surface area of these infolding to help bring in nutrients into the body. And the nutrients can either enter these underlying capillaries or for sugars and amino acids, and then fats will enter the lacteal, which are connected to the lymphatic system. As we mentioned previously, the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems can regulate the GI tract. So the parasympathetic nervous system stimulates the esophagus, stomach, small intestine, pancreas, gallbladder, and intestine. And that is because when we are resting, that is a good time to digest our food. The sympathetic nervous system, which triggers the fight or flight response, for example, in reaction to an emergency, inhibits peristalsis and secretion. It also stimulates contraction of the sphincters through the GI tract to reduce digestion and focus on giving blood to the skeletal muscles and heart, so then you can get away from this emergency situation. And then hormones also play a role in regulating the GI tract, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So the next topic is from mouth to stomach. So mastication is the process of chewing to break down food into smaller pieces for degglutination, which is swallowing, and mixing it with saliva. Saliva, right, contains mucus, and mucus is an antimicrobial agent, and it contains salivary amylase, an enzyme that can start to break down starch. The teeth will chew and grind, and the tongue plays an important role in the manipulation of food, so we can help get the food positioned between our teeth for chewing. So swallowing actually involves a pair of 25 muscles, and we're not going to learn the 25, but it's a pretty complicated process. So some of them are voluntary. These include the muscles of the mouth and tongue that mix food with saliva to form a bolus. The muscles in the pharynx are involuntary, and basically there are receptors there that can detect the bolus, and they will then perform the swallowing reaction. And I also wanted to mention that we have the vocal cords that are in the pharynx as well, and there is a sphincter, an upper esophageal sphincter that will relax to let the bolus pass through. And once the bolus is in the esophagus, this is also has muscles that will automatically move the food down to the stomach, and peristalsis is used to move the bolus down the esophagus to the stomach. And here is a picture of a peristaltic wave. Peristaltic wave, this is the smooth muscle contracting, and basically these smooth muscles are going to contract, and the smooth muscles below are going to be relaxing, right? And then we're going to see contraction of this smooth muscle. We need these smooth muscles below to relax, so the bolus will be pushed down to the stomach after these waves of contraction in the esophagus. The stomach has several important functions. It stores food for about 2 hours or less. It'll churn the food to mix it with gastric secretions. The digestion process begins in the stomach, and the low pH of the stomach which is pH 1, will kill the bacteria on the food thanks to the high acidic conditions. And then from here, the partially digested food can pass on to the first segment of the small intestine, which is called the duodenum. Here again is the esophagus, right here's the inside of the stomach, and then again we here to see the passage, and there's another sphincter. Remember I mentioned there's one sphincter entering the stomach, there's another sphincter and going from the stomach to the small intestine. The first segment of the small intestine is called the duodenum. So this is a close-up looking at some of the gastric pits. So the gastric pits are critical because they have several types of secretory cells that have very important functions. So one one cell that's really important to learn about is called the mucus cell. These are goblet cells that secrete mucus to help protect the stomach lining from the acid. So the mucus cells play a critical role. Again, they're also called goblet cells. The mucus cells play a critical role of secreting mucus so that all these cells lining the stomach are going to have a barrier or a layer of mucus that'll make the pH not be acidic next to these cells, because these cells will be killed by a pH of 1. So basically, the acid stays far from these cells, and because there's a layer of mucus that creates a pH buffer, giving a much more neutral pH right above the cells that are lining the stomach. The next notable cell to tell you about are the parietal cells. The parietal cells are the ones that secrete hydrochloric acid, and they also secrete intrinsic factor that helps the small intestine absorb vitamin B12. The next cell of interest are chief cells, and chief cells secrete pepsinogen, which is an inactive form of a protein digesting enzyme. And then not shown, but critically important, are G cells that secrete the hormone gastrin, and gastrin stimulates the secretion of both pepsinogen by the chief cells, and it also stimulates the secretion of hydrochloric acid by the parietal cells. And I also want to point out, you can see the villi-like structure that really has increased dramatically the surface area of the epithelium of the stomach. And this really allows for all these different cells, for many of these cells to be in this region, where if it was just one flat surface instead of these invaginations, then you would have very fewer cells that can secrete the enzymes needed for, and molecules needed for digestion in the stomach. So what are the functions of hydrochloric acid? So the hydrochloric acid can drop the pH to about 1 to 2. The low pH will help to denature proteins, and when proteins are denatured, it's easier for enzymes to get in to cleave them. And we mentioned that pepsinogen is secreted by chief cells, and pepsinogen is a protease, and that is inactive until activated by hydrochloric acid. Hydrochloric acid will convert pepsinogen to pepsin, and then pepsin is active as a protease to be cleaving polymers of amino acids down to short peptides, much shorter peptides. And I also want to mention again that the low pH of 1 or 2 in the stomach can also kill most microorganisms. And for pepsin, I just want to highlight, so we see a protein being broken down into short fragments. I just want to remind everyone that that is due to the hydrolysis of peptide bonds. I just want to also mention what gastrin does, that is the peptide hormone made in G cells. And I mentioned that that does stimulate the secretion of hydrochloric acid and pepsin. It also critically helps to maintain these secretions for as long as the bolus remains in the stomach. So this is really a positive feedback. So as long as there's food in the stomach, the G cells will be activated to secrete gastrin, because that's when you need the pepsinogen and hydrochloric acid being secreted. If there's no bolus in the stomach, then it's not, the stomach doesn't need to be secreting all this hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen, because they don't have anything to be breaking down.